So good afternoon, and thank you for the introduction. I would specifically like to thank your former president, Pani Anna Bielinska, and Vice President Alicja Bator-Nagib for inviting me here today to the Arbor Polonia Association. Can everybody hear me in the back? Tak, dobrze. No to super. So the title of my talk is The Tale of Two Wolves, How to Raise Bilingual Children, which is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I would just like to tell you a little bit about myself in these images so that you know where my background is from and where my biases are coming from. For today's presentation, I don't know why it's jumping around, but as stated earlier, I was born in Poland in Chorzów and raised in Hungary from the time that I was 4 months old. And I've been in the US for 30 years. I'm a co-founder of the Polish Language Center of Ann Arbor. This is becoming really annoying. Maybe it's my mouse. No, and now I need to go back. The wonders of technology. Okay, so co-founder of the Polish Language Center of Ann Arbor and of an informal Hungarian language school. Just so the Hungarian children can also develop linguistically. And then these are my professional associations, and I'm a, for now, associate professor, hopefully in the next couple weeks, full professor at Eastern Michigan University in the Department of World Languages. And the tale of two wolves. So in case anyone is not familiar with this Cherokee tale, a grandfather is telling his grandson that within every human being, there are two wolves fighting for domination at any given time. And when the grandfather pauses for a second, then the grandson asks, "And which one wins, grandfather?" And he says, "The one you feed." So on the surface, you might think, or one might think, that I am talking about these two wolves as the two languages fighting for good and evil, and that I'm calling one of the languages good and the other one evil. Far be it from me to suggest that. In fact, what is happening is underneath it all is, I think, the real meaning of this tale, which is habit formation. That whichever habit we feed is the one that becomes stronger, and whichever habit we neglect becomes weaker. And this is where the analogy is true. Because what is learning, and maybe I should just hand this over to the doctor, is synaptic connection. So this is where I have to go to my slides, not to say anything stupid. Yes. So at the cellular level, this is what learning looks like. The beige one-eyed monsters, these guys here, are the neurons. And the little spider webs growing out of them are the dendrites. And the single long arm growing out of each one is the axon, which end in little fingers called axon terminals. So learning happens when an axon terminal of one neuron makes contact with a dendrite of another neuron. And here, this is circled in blue. And this gap is the synapse, and learning happens through these synaptic connections. So did I say anything stupid? No, thank you. I did have a doctor double check that this was actually correct. But when you look at my references, you'll see that 50% of them are trying to understand this one slide, and the other stuff I already knew. So, but basically at the cellular level, what we're trying to do is create habits through learning. And that's what it's all about, habit formation. So to summarize in lay terms, learning in the brain is a result of physical and chemical changes in the brain. And it requires frequent and long-term stimulation. And the two key words here are frequent and long-term. You can just ignore the others for now. I'll get to those in a second. We need to strengthen the connections among neurons to form habits. In other words, the wolf that you feed gets stronger, and then the one that you don't feed gets weaker. And I would like to introduce a few terms here. We're all familiar with the native language concept, right? We all have a native language, and for most of you here, it is Polish. For me, it's Hungarian, and for some, it's probably English. It is typically the language that one grows up with in the country in which they grow up. The one that they use at school, when they go to the store, when they're on public transit, and when they go outside and play. That is the native language. For our children who are growing up here, it is English. And this is a really hard sentence for me to say. I so want it not to be English, because English for me doesn't have that emotional connection that Polish and Hungarian do. But I just have to accept the fact that for my child who's growing up here, English is the native language. On the other hand, there's the concept of the heritage language. It's a lesser known concept, and that heritage is something that we inherit from our forebears. It can be a thing, it can be an idea, but in this particular case, it can also be a language. So for all of our children, Polish is a heritage language. And I believe for you as well, right, since this is your mom. My heritage language is Polish as well. There are also other well-known concepts, foreign language. So for example, if we now decided to learn, I don't know, Spanish or Chinese or Japanese or something, we're not living there, our family doesn't come from there, we just decided for whatever reason to learn that language. So that's a foreign language. Second language, for those of us who are from elsewhere and we now live here, English is a second language because we live in that environment where everybody speaks it. But we didn't grow up speaking it during our daycare, elementary, middle, and high school years. But here, for our presentation today, I would like to focus on the concept of a heritage language because it has some unique qualities as opposed to all the others that are well known. So I would right away like to tell you the disclaimer that this image is intended to demonstrate a point. It is not drawn to scale, and it is not the result of any study. Okay? I just couldn't figure out how to do it otherwise, other than putting these little numbers in there. But I don't want to mislead anybody. So the native language is in blue here, and the heritage language is in green. In early childhood, so I'm now thinking of us who are here, we want to promote Polish among our children who are being raised with Polish as a heritage language. Their native language is English. So when they talk to neighbors, when anybody comes over and visits, they are exposed to English. But even if we say that, well, I'm not speaking a word of English to my child until they go to school, okay, then in that case, this doesn't exist. In that very earliest of childhood years, we have introduced our child to the heritage language, up to a point. But typically, these two do develop pretty much simultaneously, And if we are really, really successful, then at the time that they enter an English environment, an English playgroup or something, they're about at the same level. And then they start going to daycare. And then they start going to school. And at that point, what happens is that their native language skills shoot up and continue to grow. What happens, despite our best efforts, what happens to the heritage language is that it either stagnates or it starts to decline. Yes? Oh, absolutely. I'm happy to share my slides with you too. This is where I would like to introduce a few other concepts that will help us understand the differences between native and heritage languages. The most important term is BICS and CALP. BICS is basic interpersonal communication skills. And this is what our children have at this stage of life. Język kuchenny. Okay, so kitchen language. They're really good at, are you hungry? No, I'm not. Do you want to play? I want to play. I don't want to go to bed. Stop it. Come on over here. Stop arguing with me. That kind of everyday stuff about which parents communicate with their little children. The problem is that they get stuck at that level. Meanwhile, when they enter school, their native language, or whatever the language of the school is, that language continues to develop. Cognitive, academic, language proficiency, or CALP. That keeps developing in the language of the school, in English for our children. It is not developing in their heritage language. So how do those language forms, varieties, differ from each other? BICS is characterized by informal language. So they know the ty form. Everybody is chodź, cześć, jak się masz. But they are not familiar with the formal variety. Dzień dobry, jak się pani ma? Jak się nazywasz versus jak pani godność, right? This is all oral. They may, their listening skills become really strong. Their speaking skills, maybe, maybe not. I will speak a little bit more about that later. Some learn to read quite well. Very few learn to write at all, or at all well. In CALP, in the native language, all four of their skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, develop. And there might be some differences, but they all become very, very strong. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive school. Other qualities. Vocabulary. The vocabulary of a heritage language speaker is limited to the most high frequency words. So, such as go, come, walk. But the low frequency synonyms that show finer shades of meaning, such as saunter. When I was preparing the Polish version of this talk, I was like, saunter, how do you say that kind of stuff? I had to look it up in the dictionary. I'm a heritage speaker, right? So I came up with words, and honestly, I've never heard any one of these words, so I'm going to try them on you to see if they actually are real words or if the dictionary lied to me. Let's see if I can find them. Or if I can't find them. O! Hasać, baraszkować, buszać. Czy to są prawdziwe słowa po polsku?
To są prawdziwe słowa.
Okay.
I wouldn't call it wow.
But they are kind of versions of getting from one place to another. Yeah. So that's what I mean. And I would say that my Polish is pretty damn good for a heritage speaker. Never encountered these words. Never.
Baraszkować?
Nigdy nie słyszałam tego. Może baraszkowałam, tylko nie wiem, co to znaczy. Do tej pory nie wiem, co to znaczy. Jutro, jak będę rozmawiała z mamą przez telefon, to jej to wszystko opowiem i ona mnie, no tak, ona powie, co powie. Okay. So, yeah, low frequency versus high frequency. We keep using the kitchen language with our children, and they are never exposed to the low frequency words that allow them to get out of that early childhood. So heritage speakers, in a way, in our vocabulary, we're stuck in early childhood. The time when I felt that I actually started getting out of my early childhood was when I was having conversations with my fellow Polish language school directors and teachers, because that was the first professional conversation that I had in Polish. I never had the need before. Other qualities of a heritage language are, the sociocultural knowledge is very fragmented. It is limited to the home, the family, religious holidays, and whatever national holidays happen to be celebrated, the calendar, you know, now it's spring, what do we celebrate, what does nature look like, and community events. And then it kind of gets stuck right there. And also much better receptive than productive skills. So receptive skills, anything that comes in, so listening and reading is much stronger than productive skills, producing language by speaking or writing. So let me see what my next slide is. Yeah. A few more terms. Input is the language that is coming in. So that input could be oral, so it could be coming in through hearing. It could be visual by reading or watching. The processing is what happens inside us, and then the output is when we produce the language, when we speak it or write it. In a heritage language situation, the input is very limited and very, very restricted. As I said, it's typically restricted to the home and the immediate surroundings of the home and to kitchen language. In order for, now children are not masochists. They are not stupid. They will not do anything and not make any extra effort if they don't have to. Why would they be trying to struggle to communicate in a language if there is no need, right? So there needs to be a need. We need to create a need. Some children have internal motivation to do it, but it might come late in life at a point where language acquisition turns into effortful learning. Negotiation, we need to talk about the concept of negotiation of meaning. It is an essential element of language acquisition, and what we mean by that is a breakdown in communication, not utter complete breakdown to the point of screaming, but breakdown of misunderstandings. The child wants something, the parent misunderstands or whoever they're talking to misunderstands, then they're like, well, do you mean this? No, I don't mean that. Well, what about this? No, oh, that's what you mean. That is an essential element. So when we try to rescue the children and anticipate what they want and say it for them, we are depriving them of this essential element of language learning, which is negotiation of meaning. And parents do it, grandparents do it, babysitters do it, teachers at schools do it, but we shouldn't be doing it. We should allow the kid to struggle through it. Noticing of linguistic forms does happen. In childhood, it happens more naturally than in adulthood, and they have to pay attention to the language itself. But all of that, if we allow for the negotiation of meaning to happen, then all of this is going to strengthen the negotiation. Because usually we misunderstand something because we didn't say it correctly. So then when we find out, oh, that was not the right way to do it, there's a better way to do it, then we typically remember it for the next time. And then output is when we produce the language. Whether we produce it in speech or whether we produce it in writing, we have to produce it. And this is another element where we typically go wrong when we try to raise bilingual children, is that we are not consistent in requiring that the child produce output.
What do you mean?
What I mean is, czy chcesz jeść? Okay, proszę. Right there. First mistake. Czy chcesz jeść? Tak. Tak. Powiedz tak. Tak. Proszę bardzo. Okay? So if we don't force the child to produce output, then, and this is the most extreme case that I am aware of personally. I have a friend who, whose parents emigrated from Hungary in 1956. And he was born here. His Hungarian is very interesting. I can talk to him about autonomous vehicles. I can talk to him about self-driving cars in Hungarian. And the only thing he can say back to me in Hungarian is, how are we doing? And Happy New Year. That's it, 2 things. 2 formulaic sequences, nothing else. His receptive language is so advanced because he heard it so much, but he was never required to produce any output. He had no need for it, he didn't practice it, it didn't happen. Now, for most people, it's not like that. For most people, the difference isn't like this. For most people, the difference is like that, right? But it's still an essential element of language acquisition. Just trying to make sure that I am covering everything here. The need for the child to use the language that is harder for them could be emotional, that is the language of my dear mama, mamushka, or daddy, or babcia. Yeah, very often it's babcia or dziadzia. So it could be an emotional need. It could be an instrumental need. For example, when I was growing up in Hungary with my Polish mother, and around the age of 10, I absolutely refused to speak Polish. I did not want to be different from all my friends. And I forbade my mother to say anything in Polish when we were out in public. But the way my mother very skillfully helped me survive those 2 years is that I really wanted to go do rhythmic gymnastics. And she said, absolutely, no problem. I'll sign you up for rhythmic gymnastics. It will cost you 1 hour of Polish speaking a day. So that was instrumental motivation. I get this. It's like a transaction. But that allowed my Polish to stay alive long enough where afterwards my other forms of motivation kicked in, and then there was no longer the need for the bribe. Yeah. Okay, and now more practical parts of my talk. Hello, wake up. Okay, so this is why raising bilingual children is a challenge, is because a million times in a day we reach decision points. And it is so easy when we're running around, we're frustrated, we're late, we're busy, something just spilled, someone's crying, to take the easier route. It is so easy. But remember, frequent and over a long time, repetition. Whichever wolf we feed is the one that gets stronger. And whichever one we don't feed gets weaker. So at these decision points, if we just go with what's easier just to maintain our own sanity, we are unwittingly feeding the wolf we're not intending to feed. I'm not saying the wrong wolf, the evil wolf. It's just not the one we want to feed. Okay, so I've got 2 slides like this. I know it's a little busy, but this slide is focused on situations that the child does, and the next slide will be focused more on what the parent is doing or what the life of the parent looks like. So this is where we've got what the child does, what it presents us with, and then this is how we could respond to it. So the child is reluctant to use Polish. There could be many reasons for it. One could be that they simply don't have the language for it. They just don't know. So saying po polsku only helps if they know how to say it po polsku. But if they don't know how to say it po polsku, then it's not going to happen. It's just going to frustrate them, right? So how can we help a child who simply doesn't have it to do it? We ask choice questions, okay? So, jesteś głodna? Okay, that's a yes-no question. Czy chcesz, nie wiem, zupę pomidorową, czy zupę ogórkową? Okay, that's a choice. The answer could be, but we already know that we're not accepting that as an answer, right? And in a choice question, almost always, the answer has to be a word. So they'll have to say ogórkowa, for example, right? But if we say, czy chcesz zupę, czy chcesz tę zupę, czy chcesz ogórkową, then all they have to say is tak albo nie. But if we say ogórkową czy pomidorową, then they have to say ogórkową. And even the most reluctant children will eventually give in. I remember at the Polish school, we were still like 3 buildings ago. I was teaching the real little ones, and I brought in a different animal every week. And it was the surprise animal. So I would bring it in, it would be covered up, and the first hour of the lesson was trying to learn about this animal that we don't yet know what it is, right? And so I don't even remember what it was, if it was like chickens or a rabbit or what it was, but it was covered up. And all the kids lined up to finally see what it is. And there came this one kid, and he's like, no powiedz, co chcesz robić. Powiedz, czy mogę zobaczyć, co tam jest? I tak dalej. Powtarzam, zachęcam, podaję słowa. Kid nothing, right? I'm like, okay, why don't you just step aside and listen to how everybody else is saying it? And by the time the entire row went past him, he was like, czy mogę zobaczyć, co tam jest? So it's possible. Now, it's a lot harder at home than it is at school. But once you start it, and once the kid realizes this is my new life, this is my new reality, they will accept it. But it's very hard when it's not happening from birth. It's much easier if you just never give them the option. But if you're trying to switch later in life, it's still possible. You're just going to encounter some resistance. So provide model answers. So just like I was doing with this child, I said, czy mogę zobaczyć, co tam jest? Now, I knew that he knew this, because if he didn't even know anything, then I would just say, czy mogę? Czy mogę? Czy mogę? And if he even says, czy mogę, I would have accepted that, because that would have already been a breakthrough of trying to produce output, right? Have high expectations, not unreasonably high, but have high expectations. And don't settle. This is really important. If you settle for nothing or English responses, the only thing they'll learn is that all they have to do is just play this game with you long enough. Eventually you'll get tired, you'll give up, and they'll win, right? But if that's not what we want, right, because we don't want to feed that wolf, we want to feed a different wolf, then it's okay if that kid doesn't get to see that animal at that time. You know, they'll get to see it 15 minutes later, or the next time, or maybe I'll bring it back. I'll say, if he hadn't even said anything at all, I would have said, you know what, why don't you practice this, and I'll bring it back just for you next time. And then you will get to see that animal next week and the new one, right? So you make it exciting somehow for them, but I wouldn't have let them see it. You incentivize, you bribe, whatever. The Polish speaker speaks Polish, so here's another situation. The Polish speaker speaks Polish in Polish, and the child responds in English. This is so common, right? Again, don't settle. Provide the language in Polish and ask for a restatement in Polish. And if your child is young enough, play dumb. Nie rozumiem. Nie rozumiem. Mama nie mówi po angielsku. Niestety. So my daughter and I had this dance go on for a few years where my husband, who is primarily an English speaker, although he speaks Polish, wasn't even at home. It was just my daughter and I at home. And she would stand in the middle of the room. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. And I'm deaf. I can't hear anything. And then after a while, przepraszam, czy mówiłaś coś? Nie, do tatusia mówię. Or, I'm sorry, I'm talking to daddy. I'm like, oh, okay, no problem. So this went on for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, and then eventually, mamo, jestem głodna. Oh, kochanie, dobrze, już. Okay? So play dumb. And then if you provide the language, just even jestem głodny, you provide the language, ask them to say it back. So now it is so automatically ingrained in my daughter that even now when she's 14, almost 15, and is sad that she's got the stupidest parents on earth, and she's totally embarrassed by us and all of that. Even now, when I say something in, like, she'll tell me a story in Polish or Hungarian, mix in some English words, I provide those words while she's talking. She just automatically picks them up and keeps going, Like she weaves them into her story because it is now so ingrained. But that is the result of lots and lots of decision points. Next one, child asks for movie, story, TV, games, anything, absolutely, but we only have the Polish version, right? So if they ask for, they're not going to ask for Kubuś Puchatek or Misiuszatek or none of that stuff that we grew up with. They're going to be asking for whatever their friends at school are watching. But almost all of that is available online now in Polish. And sorry, only our Polish TV works. The rest doesn't work. Children play in English amongst themselves. So this is really common, especially if there are younger siblings. So with the oldest child, it's very common. We still have lots of time, and we can kind of control the linguistic environment. Then comes the next child. And between the two of them, the play language becomes English. And that's a really difficult moment. And that second child gets much less of us providing that Polish language input. So usually second children's Polish gets worse, subsequent children's even worse. So when the children start playing English amongst themselves, either siblings or in a play group, then this is what you could do. It's a bit of an effort, is you model the play. The reason they play in English is because they don't have the language to play in Polish. It's not that they want to be mean or anything. They just don't have the words. So with the Hungarian play group, what we ended up doing was we saw that our children were beginning to switch to English. Then we mothers got together on the ground and starting fighting over dolls. You know, daj, nie dam. Mamo, ona się popycha. And we behaved exactly the way children would behave in that situation. Now, our children were looking at us like we were crazy, but eventually the game that we were playing seemed interesting enough where they joined in and we could exit. Okay? But we needed to model it for them because they don't have the language to do what they want to be doing in Polish. And that language shouldn't be sterile the way it would appear in a textbook, but it should be the authentic language that the kids would want to be playing. Otherwise, they're not getting what they need, and they will start substituting English words anyway. The child needs friends. We need to create opportunities with other Polish-speaking children. So that's why these Polski Wtorek, Polska Środa, or whatever it's called nowadays, I hope it's still going on. I hope there are still Polish playgroups. Are there Polish playgroups? Poniedziałki, polskie poniedziałki, super. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is, as long as it's happening. And it may sound cruel, but I would segregate my children's friends by language. For about 10 years, my daughter had 3 birthday parties. I don't think she minded it terribly. She had a Hungarian party where only Hungarian kids were invited, those who spoke Hungarian. Just because they're of Hungarian origin, if they don't speak Hungarian, they're not going to help me maintain a Hungarian-speaking environment. And there was a Polish group, and several of you were always invited to the Polish birthday parties, right? And then there are those who are whatever other language. But what I am doing right now, which is that because of, you know, one or two people's Polish not quite being at the level that it would be required to understand my professional presentation in Polish, therefore I am switching to English. Bad example. Don't do that, right? So no, I mean, with adults I can do that, but with children I wouldn't. I would say it to my, if we happen to have a mixed group, I will say it to my Polish child in Polish, and then I will turn to everybody else and say it in English, as opposed to everybody just once in English. My child, I am communicating with you in the way that I want to communicate with you. With everybody else, for your all comfort, I will say it in that other language as well. but segregate as long as it's possible. After a while, it will not be possible, but by that point, these habits and the linguistic connections have been strengthened to the point where even if you just become superficial or not superfluous, then it won't matter anymore because there are strong foundations. That Polish wolf is now so strong and so well fed that it's okay if occasionally the other wolf gets fed. If there is no play group, make one. Okay? And this is really important. Expect adherence to the rules from everybody. Again, this may sound, I think the biggest message that some of you will get, those of you who don't know me, will probably get and walk away with is like, man, she was mean. Because as I'm listening to myself here thinking, yeah, I think I would call it really consequential. Knowing what I want and pursuing it because as a single-minded focus because it is so important to me. But it's those decision points. So expect adherence to the rules. What I see very frequently and what I've encountered with the Polish playgroups and the Hungarian playgroups as well is that new families wanted to join and they would bring their kids, let the kids play, and the parents would want to talk to the parents. And that's a totally understandable human reaction. We all we crave our friends. We crave talking to people who are like us. Except, are we there for us or are we there for our children? Because sometimes we have to make a choice. And therefore, with the play groups, we had rules. And the rule was we are there for the children because we want the children to learn the language. We already speak it. But just because we, friends, practice lots and lots of Polish or Hungarian amongst ourselves while not paying any attention to the fact that our kids are now speaking in English, what we have done is we have ruined the rest of the playgroup for the others, okay? So what we ended up doing was we set out these rules, and if somebody wasn't willing to adhere to these rules, they didn't come to our meetings. We went and met separately, right? We went to the movies together and to the restaurant together, and we left our kids. But this is sacred space. It's sacred space, and we had to preserve it. And so what we did was, and I did a lot of times, is when I heard that the kids were playing in English, then I would go over and, jakie to jest fajne, czy ja mogę? Czy mogę ci zabrać? Whoop, that kind of, reminded them that we're speaking Polish. Then I could go back and talk to the adult more. But I ended up doing this a lot of times. And again, it's a decision, but it's those decision points that really strengthen the wolf. The child code switches. So code switching means you're talking in one language and then you don't know that word and you kind of use the word in another language. For example, nie mogę się dodzwonić do Ilonki, we're playing phone tag, no ale wiesz co, po 2 tygodniach nareszcie udało mi się, nie? Play phone tag. So I was talking in Polish and then I brought in this other expression that is so much easier to say, right? Or mamusiu, czy mogę mieć play date z kimś tam, nie? So there's a really good expressions in English that don't have a nice equivalent, but people used to call each other before and leave messages for each other. And people used to play with each other, and people used to have sleepovers even before we knew these terms. So yes, it's a bit of extra work, But let's take the effort and let's learn that zostawiłam jej wiadomość, potem ona mi zostawiła wiadomość, potem ja, już trzeci raz, ale nareszcie się udało, nie? So let's learn the expressions in Polish and model what is expected. Expect repetition and then restate it, but don't allow for code switching. Now, in the literature, and I gave this talk once to the Hungarians, and there was a professor there who was like, well, the literature on code switching says that it really helps communication. Absolutely. And among adults who are already comfortable in both languages, I would say, yes, code switch as much as you want. It is a really good thing. But when you're trying to raise bilingual children, you're allowing them to code switch. Pretty soon, half of what they say will be in English. You just can't let it happen. Okay, I think I managed to convince the guy, but okay, and now, so the previous slide talked about what the situation looked like from the perspective of the children. But now, we as adults also have some really serious considerations here. So the Polish speaker creates an input-poor environment as if they were in Poland. This is why we talked about native languages and heritage languages at the beginning. In a native language environment, you're not the only source of the language. So if you are shy, quiet, tired, and don't want to talk too much, that's okay. The kid goes to the neighbor and already they speak Polish, right? They go to school, they speak Polish. They go to the playground, to the neighbors, whatever. They speak Polish with everybody. You don't have to be the only source of that language. But here you do. So here we don't have the luxury of behaving the way we would behave back home. Here we are the source of the input. We have to. Comprehensible input is the number one requirement for language acquisition. So it's that black box, you know. There has to be input. If there is no input, you get people like Jeannie, you know, who when she was discovered at the age of 13 or 14, after having been deprived of any language, she was not able to learn the language, right? So it's impossible to learn a language. And there have been studies done on putting kids, really little kids, in front of TV screens, etc., to see how much language they can learn. They can't. A real, live human being with whom the baby can interact is essential in order to trigger the language acquisition device. Now, later with 2, 3, 4-year-olds, then we can put on the electronic babysitter. But with the little ones, language will not start and will not develop. It has to be triggered by a human being. And that human being, unfortunately, has to be a parrot. You just have to keep talking and commenting and explaining. Oj, co robisz? Oj, jakie to fajne. I idziesz teraz, i chodzisz, i patrzysz przez nogi. Tak, i teraz widzisz kamień. Oj, jaki to fajny kamień. Podniesiemy ten kamień. Co ty na to? Dotknij ty. No. So we wouldn't be doing that at home. We would just say, oh, kamień, right? And we would be done with it. But here, if we don't do it, who will? We're it, right? You are it. You need to create an input-rich environment. The child uses, the adult uses single words. For example, oh, kamień, chodź, buty, idziemy, okay? From that, the child will learn, chodź, buty, idziemy. But they will not learn, chodź, załóż buty, bo idziemy do babci na obiad, right? Because they have no way to learn it. The only source is us. Therefore, we have to say it, and frequently, right? We can't just say one time. We have to say it over and over and over and over. It's really tiresome, but it's possible. The Polish code switches, Polish speaker code switches, we've already talked about that. Look up the Polish idiomatic expressions. Okay, so there are many limitations to raising a child in a heritage language environment. It is so much easier when we can just teleport them to Poland and deposit them with someone, and they can be immersed in that rich environment, right? But money and time are always a consideration, right? And I know that so many families look forward to the vacation that they can take together, you know? The spouses and all the kids together, but one of them only has 2 weeks vacation. The other one might have longer, but we all want to go together. And again, I'm not saying that that's a bad choice, that there are many good things about being together, but perhaps it might be worth considering being a little bit more flexible and looking for more creative solutions, such as tag teaming. One person takes the kid. If the kid is old enough, depositing them with a grandparent, coming back, working. The other one goes and picks the kid up and brings it back, right? If the kids are even older and there are zaprzyjaźnione families, then you can, that was code switching, because I just couldn't think of the word, well-acquainted families. So then, you know, maybe they can even take your kid with them, whatever it is. But tag teaming is a consideration, possibility. This is another thing. The family goes together to Poland, and then they stay together as a family unit, and they keep going. Whatever habits they have established here, those are the habits that are going to be following them around there too. So if the kid is used to talking to us in English, just because we're in Poland, they're going to continue to talk to us in English. So the best thing that we can do for them is allowing them to have their own little environment. When they're very little, then they're very motivated to talk to babcia and dziadek. When they're a little bit older, it's children who motivate them. And especially since babcia and dziadek really, really want to help, so they don't necessarily enforce the output, that they don't require that the child produce output, but they're like, oh yeah, my kohana, I'll just give it to you anyway, even if you don't say it, right? So we're thereby undermining the language acquisition process. The best thing is to find opportunities for the child to be with Polish peers without the family. Okay, I'm not saying, you know, sell your kid for the next week or whatever, although when they're older, they'll probably want to do that anyway. But send them to the przedszkola, right, for 4 hours. And then the rest of the time, that's when you can catch up with, you know, the rest of the family without the kid. But the kid is now, for that 4 hours, they are in a really rich linguistic environment. And if there are lots of kids their age who are available to you, great, let them run around the podwórku, that's wonderful, but I didn't grow up in Poland, so I didn't know anybody. I had my cousins who are much older than me. There were no kids there, so for us it was always przedszkole, szkoła, obóz, półkolonie, kolonia nad morzem, etc. And it's incredible what boost that does. So maximize the time with the native Polish and not heritage peers. So if there is a choice between, if it's a real choice between a week of camp in Chicago versus a week of camp in Poland, absolutely choose Poland. Because in Chicago, it's a whole bunch of heritage speakers for whom English is a much stronger language than Polish. Talked about that. Make Poland and Polish attractive through edutainment, modern music, films, social media, YouTube, etc. A lot of us, probably not consciously, but carry the Poland in our hearts and minds that we left. And it's as if Poland hadn't changed, developed, kept up with modern times since we left. But it has. It has changed. And although here's Farski, because I promised it to someone, you know, and Farski was wonderful 250 years ago when it was written, and now it's really nice and colorful. Things have moved on. My child spent precisely 30 seconds looking at Farski saying that. But I brought some other things here that I want to show you that have been really motivational, to the point where my kid has read this, right? It's Moja pierwsza mitologia, because they were just interested in that. And there's a lot of text here, but they were interested in that. And this, which is so much easier, was torturous. So basically we have to keep up with the times, and not necessarily just because it was fun for us and we have fond memories of something. I'm not saying don't pass that on too, but just see what it is that today's Polish kids are actually interested in. And many of them are interested in English stuff, but see if there's something in Polish that they're interested in. So make it attractive. And revise the Heritage School curriculum to make it play-based, task-based, project-based, content-based. These are the terms that you want to be looking for. So for the younger children, a play-based curriculum. For the older children, from about elementary school on, task-based, project-based, and then middle school on content-based. Because those are the things that they require to develop their cognitive academic language proficiency in a way that is interesting for them as well. So to summarize, repetition, over time, provide ample input in Polish, almost never settle for lack of response in Polish. And the reason it's almost is, clearly if your child comes home from school and is crying that so-and-so was mean to me, etc., that is not the time to say that in Polish, right? But you listen with your heart, whatever, and then afterwards, if it's okay, then you say, oj, bardzo mi przykro, że ktoś tam się znęcał nad tobą, że był taki niemiły. You know, and you've just provided the language that they needed, right? And so then you find another opportunity. You know, you don't want to do X, Y, Z, and you want to use the words. Make Polish attractive from the child's point of view, not our point of view. And maximize native language contact with the peers in Poland, as opposed to just heritage language context. I mean, here, that's what we've got. So with every action and inaction, we are feeding one of the wolves. And this is really important. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. I do have some references here, and najlepsze życzenia z okazji Dnia Matki. Matki Amerykanki, bo matki Polki jeszcze 26, tak. A matki węgierski tydzień temu, więc... Yeah, well, I don't want to start all over, but do you have any questions, any comments? Do you want to tell me what an awful mother I am for having subjected my child to it, who, by the way, is trilingual, and still doesn't hate me, well, more than a typical 14-year-old does get embarrassed by their own mother. But I have brought, feel free to ask questions if you have any or make comments, but I have brought some things, meanwhile, that feel free to take a look at, that have really worked very well. And you'll see that the klasyki are not really among them. They just weren't of any interest to my kid. But Iza.